What is a paranormal experience you've had? Story 1. My family has a cabin next to a lake in Vermont that we spend time at in the summer. One night, while sleeping in the upstairs bedroom, I hear what sounds like someone getting up to go to the bathroom. It was coming from right across the hallway outside my door, so I assumed it was my mom, usual occurrence. Oddly enough, no lights went on and no bathroom noises. The sound of footsteps just stopped. A minute later, I had this odd feeling that someone was standing at the half-open door to my bedroom, watching me. This feeling went on for minutes until all of a sudden, the feeling of someone standing by the door turned into the feeling of someone standing directly over the bed. For the next 5 minutes, I had the terrible feeling that something was looming over me with their face mere inches from mine. The 5 minutes or so seemed to last forever. Suddenly, as soon as the feeling started, it abruptly ended. No retreating footsteps, no noise at all. Whatever it was just gone. The next morning, my family and I are eating breakfast at the table, and I still couldn't shake the feeling. Then my sister spoke up and asked, "Mom, what time was it that you got up to go to the bathroom?" "Last night. I could hear you up and walking around from the downstairs bedroom." Confused, my mom said that she never got up last night. My brother laughed and said, "Mom, we all heard you." Then my dad piped up and said, "No, your mom never got up. I didn't either." That's when I shared my experience. Freaked everyone out. Story 2. When I was a kid, I had a dream about my grandfather, and he was saying goodbye to me. My mom woke me up to tell me he had just died, and I hugged her to let her know that I knew already. She was petrified. I was his favorite grandchild, and I miss him every day. Answer: I didn't dream of him before he died, but when one of my friends committed tragic end, I was emotionally distraught. The last thing I told him was that I didn't want to talk to him again. He told me he was going to ask my friend out, and I had a crush on him. So, one particularly bad night, a couple days after everyone found out, I had the most peaceful dream ever. We were hanging outside of our school on the benches, which we did normally. We both lived in walking distance, but we would just hang out and talk to each other. I remember I was upset in my dream, and I asked him how heaven was. He laughed in his infectious laugh and told me it was great, as he can eat all the Mexican food that he wants. He told me he was at peace. I woke up the next day and could finally accept his passing. That wasn't my brain trying to make me feel better. That was my friend seeing my very real pain and coming back to me, if only briefly. Story 3. My sister and I shared a room when we were tweens, and we both swore that it was haunted. We'd hear strange sounds and see weird stuff out of the corner of our eye. There was also an oppressive feeling of something very wrong once the sun went down. My sister and I were way too old to be afraid of the dark, and we were fine with darkness anywhere else. Eventually, my sister refused to sleep in the room. Mom, of course, didn't think there was any possible way we had ghosts and thought this whole thing was ridiculous. Until we went to summer camp. We came gone to this story from our mom. We had been gone for a couple of nights. Our dad was working graveyard, so Mom had the house to herself. She was getting ready for bed and heard laughter from our room. She heard it a few times before it struck her that we weren't there. Mom checked the room and the lights were on. Mom tried to convince herself that she was imagining things and turned the lights off. She heard the laughter again, and she went to check again. The lights were on again. Mom instinctively just said, "You kids go to bed," and she didn't hear them anymore. After that, Mom believed us, but we were still kind of stuck with the room. It was an old house that we had while we were saving up for a better place. My sister adopted a cat, which helped for some reason, but it was months before the cat would go into our room without flipping out, like literally ears pinned back, growling, hissing, and bolting out of the room like a bullet. We eventually were able to move to a nice home. and even Mom was too happy to leave. Answer: lol. What is it about moms and ghosts? We used to live in this small house that was converted from the previous owner's servants' quarters. Anyway, we heard footsteps around the house so often it became normal for us. There was never a feeling of dread or anything, they were just hanging around. Anyway, one afternoon my mom was outside doing the laundry. She heard footsteps coming from the house, and since she was alone, we were at school and my dad was at work, she knew that it was them walking around. For some reason, it just wasn't her day and it irritated her, so she screamed at the house, "Stop it or I'm never coming back inside." And so they stopped, lol. Story 4. Back in 1984, when I was 10 years old, I was out shopping with my mother when she suddenly all but collapsed. Some people and I helped her to a nearby seat, and after a few seconds she turned to me and said, "Your grandmother has died." We went home, a 30-minute drive, and upon arrival she learnt that her mother had indeed died half an hour before. To this day, it's the only inexplicable thing I've ever witnessed, but I have no doubt in my mind that there was some sort of link between the two of them that was broken that day. Answer: my mother has done this too. She was sat on the couch next to me and she said, "What's that smell?" and started sniffing the air. She then said it smells very strong of baby wipes and that she started getting cold. Baby wipes were a very common smell of my grandmother on my father's side. His face then looked horrified and she said, "I have to phone your dad. His mother has died." So she phoned him and he said it was probably all coincidental. He phoned her back about 15 minutes later, saying that his mother died 20 minutes ago. Story 5. I've posted this before, but here you go. My brother and I were home alone one night watching TV. My mother was working a night shift and father was out. Father came home and pushed her door ajar and poked his head through to say hello. We both turn around and say hello back. Father closed door. 30 seconds after, another man opens the door to say hello. We both turn around and say hello back. Man closes door. We assume a friend of my father has come back to the house too. Anyway, about 5 minutes later, I head into the kitchen where my father was, making dinner or whatever, and him expecting to see his friend again. I see that he's alone making dinner and assumed his friend was upstairs in the bathroom. I ask my father who his friend is. My father looks at me and asks me, "What friend?" I reply, "The guy who came back with you." Dad looks at me thinking I'm some sort of weirdo. He says I came back home on my own. Biggest what I've ever experienced. My brother was freaked out to the max. Remembering the man's face, he was pale-looking and bright white hair. Answer: this reminds me of when I saw a double of my granddad. My sister and I were playing on the family computer on the second floor, which happens to right next to the stairs going down. We saw my grandpa go down the stairs and we said bye to him, but he ignored us and kept walking. We thought it was weird because he always say hello or bye to us at the very least. Then 5 seconds later, we heard his bathroom toilet flush and my grandpa walking out. We even asked him how he got up the stairs without us seeing him. We just saw him go downstairs, but he said he hasn't went downstairs all day. Gives me the spooks. Story 6. I used to see a little boy in the corner of my room mostly at nighttime when I was about 13, I could see and sense that he wasn't a living human being, and his clothes were really old-fashioned. I was never really scared because he always had a positive energy around him. Can't really explain it. I talked to him sometimes and he told me his name, etc. Can't really remember any of the things he told me anymore. But the most interesting thing happened during a fight between me and my mom. My cousin and her mother were visiting us at the moment, and I had never told them about this boy since. Ghosts aren't really a light discussion over dinner kind of thing. At some point, I had had enough of the fight and got out, slammed the door behind me, and for some reason went to a parking garage under our house to chill and cool down for a few hours. My mom, cousin, and aunt went looking after me and eventually found me. My cousin told me that she had got the idea to look from the parking garage after she had seen a young blonde boy with weird clothes standing by a fence that was right next to a door to the garage. She told me that the boy just stood there, and when he got her attention, he jumped over the fence and disappeared. Only that behind the fence there was a thick bush full of big thorns, and there is no way a little boy would have just jumped in it, and let alone not make a sound after getting stabbed by the thorns. I guess my friendly ghost wanted to help. Story 7. My grandmother's sister was a nun, and she stayed with our family during their last years. She always sat on the terrace of our house, overlooking the garden and streets. She loved staying there as she can watch the people go by. She died when my little brother was like 3 or 4. Terrace wasn't usually used by us ever since no one liked going up there. A year after, little brother and I decided to go up to the darn place. Halfway through the hallway, he stopped, pointed at where our grandma always sat, and asked me, "Who's that? Is that one of our grandmas?" Story 8. When I was 8 or 9, my family volunteered at a place that basically purchased historical buildings and set them up like a huge outdoor showroom. All the volunteers were dressed up in period clothing for the buildings they staffed, so it was like getting shot straight back to the pioneer days. There were like 7 or 8 kids out there most weeks, so it became a Lord of the Flies situation. One day, we all wandered out into the open land between the show areas to a place that had this huge great oak tree. I was walking with another girl who stopped suddenly and froze up. I asked her what was wrong, and she just pointed and said, "Look." There was a beautiful woman there that neither of us had ever seen before, in a purple Victorian dress, and she was dancing by herself. It took us both a second to process, and in that time she had completely faded away. We later found out that a third girl saw her too. Nobody has any explanation, and she wasn't a volunteer as far as anyone knows. Story 9. I worked at a haunted house, and once when looking down the hall of one of our actor exits, there stood a figure, like an all-black, somewhat transparent silhouette of a human standing, motionless in front of me. I stayed at the hall entrance and called my boss over and asked her to look down the hall, but didn't give any indication that I saw anything, so I wouldn't give her a false impression. When she looked, her expression was pure cold fear. "Who the fudge is that?" she said. I told her, "I don't know, but you see him too, right?" "I see through him. Who the fudge is that?" And before I could say anything more, it came full sprint at us. My boss screamed and ran away, but I was curious what it would do, so I stayed. It got right up to my face and just stopped, inches away from my nose, then suddenly dissipated into thin air. I still occasionally see my boss, and she confirms every time that we saw the same thing, and thinks I was an idiot for staying, but at the same time it was cool. Story 10. My maternal grandmother was dying in the hospital. She had a DNR, but my grandpa wouldn't let go. I was at school in the journalism room. This was 1997, and I didn't have a cell phone. Suddenly, I was overcome with a suffocating sadness, and I heard my grandmother tell me she needed Grandpa to tell her he would be okay so she could finally pass. I called my mom at the facility and relayed the message. My mom was silent for a few seconds and then agreed to pass on what I had said. In an hour, I got the call that Grandma had died. At her funeral, I was so devastated by grief and guilt. I was convinced I had to eliminate her. As I sobbed, I felt 2 hands gently press on my shoulders from behind me. Again, I heard my grandma. She said she was grateful and thanked me for helping her move on. I immediately stopped crying and the guilt lifted. Story 11. Only a few people believe me when I say that my old house is haunted. Instead of writing a long story, I'm just going to bullet point things that have happened to me or anyone else in the house. My sister has seen a shadow of a child. My older sister, who didn't believe in the paranormal, started screaming at around 3 a.m. She was hysterical. She said that there was a maid in her room just watching her, and the maid lunged towards her. I've been breathed on, and it petrified me. My baby sister used to have full conversations with nobody. My family went out for the day, and as we got back, the neighbor pulled us over to her and asked why my baby sister was laughing so much. My mother asked what she meant, and the neighbor says Natalie was laughing really loud earlier, and for quite a while, I was laughing at her laughing. My mother then told her that we had been out all day and the house was empty. My sister and I were alone in the house when we heard a thud from upstairs. We went into the room where the thud was, and it was freezing cold. Then out of nowhere, the TV remote control flew off the sideboard and hit the wall. The back of it and the batteries flew in different directions when it smashed. Me and my sister ran downstairs and after building some courage for a while, decided to go back up. We got in the room and the remote was back on the sideboard, fixed. All pets have mysteriously died in that house, and the longest lasting one was 6 months. 6 rats, a rabbit, 2 hamsters, and a cat. All dead, not at the same time. Candles always fell from the positions and onto the floor. One room was always freezing and electrical always turned on by themselves in that room. A constant feel of someone watching you. The master bedroom was always thumping, creaking, and causing insomnia. My baby sister started sleep-talking, but it wasn't in her voice. It was a deep, scary voice. It would always be questions like, "Are you all right?" She began sleepwalking and watching one of my other sisters as she slept. It was only that one older sister, never anyone else. A wardrobe in one of the rooms would always open during the night on its own. There is a photograph of my baby sister staring at a streak of light. The light wasn't there when the picture was developed. I began researching the house, and it turns out that the land the house stands on used to be an old children's home which was closed due to negligence and lack of care for the children. Could explain the little girl's laugh, the maid, and the shadow of a boy. There's so many things to list that I can't describe. I was always skeptical about the paranormal until I moved into that house. I am now a 100 firm believer. I never want to go back in that house again. Story 12. We had some newly built dorms at the college I went to. We had a big room that was me and my roommate, a door to the kitchen, and there was a door to the other room where my other suite mates stayed. My GF stayed there every night with me as well. One night, my roommates had left for the weekend, and it was just me and my girlfriend. We were watching a movie, and we heard a chair drag across the floor in the kitchen, and then our door slowly closed. I jumped up and checked, and none of my roommates were home. Flash forward to about 2 weeks, and I'm staying in my dorm alone, GF and roommates gone. The power went out in my dorm, and it was storming very bad outside. I was laying there in a dead silent room when all of a sudden the edge of my bed pushed down like someone sat on it. I felt this cold gust of wind blow on my neck, and I freaked out and jumped up and turned my phone flashlight on and proceeded to be scared shitless the rest of the night. Story 13. Was at a beach house with my family when I was a kid, shared room with my siblings, and my big brother, already in his late teens, got the top bunk and I got the bottom one. Me being very young, around 11 or 12, went to sleep while he was out with his friends and my mom watching movies in the living room. I had a horrible nightmare and woke up gasping, in a cold sweat and shivering, scared out of my mind. My brother somehow noticed it and calmed me down, hugging me, telling me it would be okay. It was just a dream. Didn't really see his face, but it was a masculine figure and voice, bigger than me, that came down from above me. In the morning, I went to thank him for that, and he was very confused, said he didn't come home until early morning, and since it was so late, he slept in the other room not to wake me. Story 14. When I was around 13, I started getting a bad feeling around our house. There were certain areas I refused to go into, and I was terrified to close my eyes at night. I was always a nervous child, but this went far beyond that. There are a few incidents of note, and I'm going to share them in the order I remember them in. I was having a Skype call in my room with a friend, and at some point I left the room with the video chat still on, facing a somewhat shiny section of my bed frame. When I came back, my friend looked shaken. I asked him what had happened, and he explained that he'd seen a face pass by in the reflection while I was gone. We checked to see if there was any way to move the camera to where it showed his own face, and we couldn't find one. While looking for a game I'd lost, I went up into the bonus room of our house. For reference, this was a room above the garage, disconnected from the rest of the house except through the narrow laundry room. I dislike going up there. In most cases, I refused because it gave me the most horrible feeling. Some of my friends said even just going into the laundry room made them uncomfortable. After searching for a few minutes, I lost my nerve and went to head back down the stairs and get out of there. As I was heading down the stairs, I froze, an icy feeling in my gut, and started to turn around. Before I could, I felt the distinct impression of hands on my back, shoving me. I just barely caught the handrail before I went tumbling and ran out of there like a bat out of hell. After the previous incident, I decided to put a line of salt down in the laundry room. I figured it couldn't hurt, and it'd be a good test to see if anything was actually happening or if I was just spooking myself. I put the salt down, and the very next day, the feeling of dread had already dulled throughout the house. I could relax, at least somewhat, and the stuff that had been happening stopped. Until I came home one day, and the feeling was back worse than it had ever been. My parents had hired a cleaner who had swept up the laundry room. I was terrified of what might happen next, but couldn't bring myself to get that close to the source again. Not long after this, I started getting the same feeling I got from the bonus room in my own room. I could feel it coming distinctly from one corner of my room. I don't know how long it was there, but eventually I got used to it. I thought again that maybe I was just scaring myself. One night I laid down and closed my eyes, and after a little bit, as I was starting to drift off, my body tensed. I couldn't move or open my eyes as that feeling from the corner of my room got stronger and stronger. I felt a dip in the bed at my side, and for a moment, nothing happened. I thought that maybe if I pretended to be asleep, whatever it was would go away. And then suddenly the feeling of hands was back and around my throat. I couldn't breathe, but I also couldn't move. My lungs burned, tears were rolling down my face, and I could feel myself starting to pass out. And just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I didn't move a muscle until I finally fell asleep. The next day, when I looked in the mirror, there was bruising all around the front and sides of my neck. I was grateful wearing collars was my thing, so that no one was suspicious about me wearing a thick one for a week until the bruises were gone. I threw salt absolutely everywhere in my room after that. Story 15. One night, my sister and I saw a black figure poke its head around a wall in our house looking at us. We were the only ones home. There were times I would hear children laughing when none were around. I've heard muffled voices coming from our TV when it was turned off. After I moved out of our house, my mom and sister woke up to one of the dining room chairs pushed up to the kitchen sink, like someone who couldn't reach the sink would need. A few days before I had my daughter, my grandmother had emergency surgery and didn't wake up from it until a week later. She never really recovered from it. but did tell some of my cousins that she died when my daughter was born, and then said she saw us driving home from the hospital. She had details she couldn't possibly know. She died a month after I had my daughter. Everyone in our family knows that when you die, you let everyone alive know you are okay. People get visited in dreams. I was visited by both grandmothers, and my sister was visited by our grandfather. They are very different from dreams and have left us very shaken and comforted. Story 16. Nothing crazy, but I went to Salem, MA, and visited this old graveyard where actual pilgrims of the Mayflower are buried. I was with my friend. We both didn't believe in this stuff, and as soon as we stepped into the graveyard past the gate, we saw this purple-grayish haze wash over the graveyard from the other side to us. It was almost like being able to see the wind, and it was blowing in our direction. We both looked at each other and was like, "Did you freaking see that?" I'm so glad I wasn't the only one to see it. Story 17. This was back in 2006, I think, so my memory is a bit hazy. For some backstory, I had a rough year and I wasn't completely excited about the summer. Over the school year, I lost one of my first online friends to a terminal illness she had, and my dog to cancer almost back to back just before summer vacation started. So, it was an all-around bleak time for me. The only thing that really kept me going was music and video editing, which I tried to utilize a lot with a video camera I got the year before. Fast forward to mid-July or so, and I'm taking my camera around my basement to test the different functions and features it had that I didn't tinker with much on a throwaway disc. I wasn't planning on doing much with it, so I wasn't setting out to do anything spectacular with it. After about 30 minutes of recording random things, I hooked it up to get it finalized before I tossed it into my DVD player to see what I got. As I said, I wasn't expecting to get much of anything. Around the last few minutes, the disc skipped and was stuck on a single frame for a few seconds. This was in my kitchen, where to the right of the doorway is a bar counter, and beside that is our water heater. Closet. In the corner between the bar and the closet door, there was a blurry fuzz or shadow that resembled German Shepherd. My cousin, who was watching it with me, found it to be very weird. I started thinking about this again after my cat had to be put down back in November, since my partner and I talked to my mom about feeling like he's still around, to which she said she feels the same about our dog as well. She's mentioned feeling someone stirring in bed and laying beside her whenever she was alone, and our dog would always go to bed with us growing up. Story 18. Daughter was about 8 months old. I was in the kitchen making fourth meal when she was in bed. The kitchen is directly beneath her room. I heard her a bump on the floor, her bottle, and her start crying. So Iboise, trying to get everything I was cooking turned off so I could safely go, give her the bottle back. Just as I was ready to walk out of the kitchen, I heard footsteps come into her room and she stopped crying. I figured, oh, the missus wasn't sleeping, she got the bottle and went back to cooking. About 10 minutes later, I go upstairs and the missus and the 2 other little ones were passed out. I woke up the missus and asked her if she got the baby's bottle, and she shrugged me off and murmured, "No, I'm sleeping. Didn't sleep much that night." Lowell edit. To all those who say it was probably the missus half asleep, it could be. I should probably have said before, but when the missus does do that stuff, and she does LOL, she has kind of a heavy footstep and it didn't sound like that. When she's half asleep on autopilot, she doesn't really have the mental awareness to tiptoe or WE. That's what really made me think it wasn't her. When I saw her asleep, I thought, well, that probably wasn't you, LOL. Answer. When my oldest was a baby, we had a monitor. I heard her crying and went into her room to soothe her back to sleep. I get there and she's asleep again. I go back to our room and she's crying again. My wife is like, "Didn't you try to soothe her?" I'm like, "She was asleep." This time we both go. Daughter is asleep. We get back, monitor is quiet. We go back to sleep. Then we hear over the monitor a woman's voice quietly say, "Pick her up." We run in our daughter's room and no one is there. She's fast asleep. We find out the next day our neighbors bought the same monitor as us, and it was in the same channel. We were hearing their kid. We changed the channel on ours and it was fine.